Good afternoon. My name is Pato Zondi, and it's a great pleasure to be with you and welcome you to the Sports Science Institute of South Africa's COVID-19 webinar series. Today is our final episode in this webinar series before we take a break. As a country, we enter a new level of risk on the 1st of June, level 3, which signifies further easing of restrictions, enabling greater economic activity and gradual re-socialization. There are some people, however, who have been at it since day one, who have been working consistently before and during lockdown and will continue to do so at every level of risk. The term frontline workers often conjures up images of doctors in hazmat suits, soldiers in uniforms, but during the coronavirus outbreak, workers from across a vast array of sectors have had to work around the clock, putting themselves and their families at risk to care for patients or to provide essential services. While the rest of the country was corralled behind closed doors during lockdown, a battalion of South Africans rose every day for the past 70-odd days. They went to work, they made many personal sacrifices to provide care to those most in need, or to ensure that millions of people they may not have a relationship with receive essential services. Today, we focus our attention on healthcare workers and social activists. They are often labeled as heroic for the work they do, and in many ways they are, for saving lives in the case of healthcare workers, or for recognizing the value of lives often forgotten in the case of those doing social work in communities. They have experienced the very worst and the best of COVID-19 since its impact started to be felt in South Africa. Today, we've invited 3 very special guests and local heroes to join us and share their recent experiences. Dr. Solomons, Dr. Oosthuizen, and Mr. Hatang, thank you very much for joining us. By way of introduction, Dr. Zarina Adams Solomons, I don't know why I've just come up with Adams. Dr. Zarina Solomons is a 38-year-old mom of 3 from Cape Town. She is a specialist physician who works at Gatesville Melamed since October 2018. With a team of colleagues and exceptional nursing team, she has been integral to the care of many COVID-19 patients seen at her hospital. She's experienced anguish and hope in dealing with our current reality. Dr. Elmira Oosthuizen is a specialist emergency physician who jointly runs the emergency center at Karl Bremer Hospital in Bellville. He has a special interest in health innovation, service, and education, and is currently heading a team of collaborators to develop performance tools to equip healthcare workers work under pressure. He is strongly people-focused and relationship-centered in his approach to leadership and to systems optimization. Finally, and certainly not least, Selo Hatang is the current CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. He's also an archivist and studied the processes of building and preserving archives to ensure that history is not distorted by acts of nature or acts of man. What we are currently living through right now will be recorded as a defining moment in history. It will be recognized by many as a turning point. The Nelson Mandela Foundation has joined with partners to support South Africans and our governments in the fight against the virus. One of the ways in which they are contributing to South Africa's efforts is through the Each One, Feed One campaign, which aims to bring relief to the plight of food insecurity, which has been worsened or caused by the coronavirus pandemic in our country. Selo will share more about this campaign with you when he chats to us. We have an hour in which to view the impact of the pandemic through the lens of these 3 guests. It's a crystal clear view from the front line. Today, we're going to keep our tone quite conversational. So I invite all of you who are joining us from Zoom and from Facebook to please post your questions. Share your own experiences if you're also working in the front line. Ask the panelists questions. What would you like to know of them? You can use the Q&A icon, which is at the bottom of your screen if you're joining us from Zoom. And if you're joining us from Facebook, by all means, please do post your comments in the comments bar, and we will get those questions and field them to our panelists. Without any further ado in that case, let's take a look through the lens of the frontline workers. Dr. Solomons, I'm going to invite you to start this conversation. And I'd like to ask you to share a little bit about your most recent experiences. These are photos that you have sent me that pretty much describe a day in the life of Dr. Solomons these days. Over to you.
Hi. So as we know, with this pandemic, the face of medicine has essentially changed. Before we were dealing with sort of struggles from a diabetic, hypertensive perspective, but we see that our focus is essentially shifted to COVID because our patient bulk numbers, all we see is this corona that is being admitted to our casualties. Currently, our hospital, or the hospital that I'm working at, we see quite a great deal of patients who come in with corona. And unfortunately, it's put quite significant strain on us as medical professionals, as well as my nursing personnel as well, because many of us are either currently being affected with the disease and we are finding that we're going to have to go off. In addition to the fact that it's quite trying from a clinical perspective, because as you know, none of us are trained COVID physicians. It's a new disease and we are grappling with treatment methods, how to provide our patients with the best possible care, that often makes it exceptionally challenging. It takes a lot of impact on you. We spend a lot of hours in a ward. We have to be sort of mindful of the fact that we do not want to cross-infect each other. We look after our patients, often spending long hours in full personal protective equipment, which makes it quite uncomfortable, and often having to go in as our patients are often unstable. These are the ones that are generally admitted to hospital. So there's a lot of impact from us on a sort of personal perspective, because obviously it's changed the way I live my life. I have 3 small children, all under the ages of 10. I have a mother who lives with me. She's over the age of 65. I go to work early. I often leave late, often practicing sort of sanitation procedures in my garage. Before I go up, and running upstairs and doing my bit to sort of sanitize as well, and then interacting with my family often late in the evening. You also can't establish relationships with your patients' family members, which is often difficult for us because most hospitals have now sort of put a limit on patients' family members coming in. So often I'm spending a lot of time on the phone counseling them. And it's frustrating for family members because they can't see, and the perception that everybody has of corona is unfortunately what's still being sort of portrayed in society is that if you end up with corona, you will die, which is not often the case, because I must be honest with you, most of the patients that we have admitted, or in my experience, I've seen a lot of successful discharges and patients were discharged into the care of their family. So there is a lot of positive stories that have occurred. And that we should be mindful of. And I always try to encourage my patients to think positively, but there are the few cases that are coming in that are unfortunately quite unwell and unfortunately do not make it. So trying to stay in contact with these family members is often exceptionally trying and taxing because you can't convey emotion over a phone. I find that it's a very impersonal way of interacting with people. I interact with families normally sort of more close to close, but we have to practice social distance. So it's completely new. It's different. There are positive sort of outcomes, but unfortunately we do see sort of the negative side as well.
Before you move on, I do want to ask, you touched a little bit about the impact on your family and some of the extremes that you have to go through, knowing your level of exposure.
Yes.
How have you navigated that as a family, and especially as somebody with 3 young kids? What are your personal concerns, and how have you come to a point where you've, I guess, made peace with certain things?
It's amazing. My youngest is 3. He just turned 3. And what strikes me is so my mom gets a text to say that I am leaving work. So then I pull up straight into the garage, and she actually siphons my kids up in a separate room. If one of them runs out of the room, they'll look at me and they'll know I'm in scrubs, and they'll go like, "Can we hug you?" And I'm like, "No, you can't hug me." And I'm like, "Go back to the room." And they'll go back to the room and I'll run upstairs. And once I'm upstairs, I'll basically lock the doors and I'll stay there. It's scary because, as you well know, and I'm sure Almeida can attest to this as well, when you wear an N95 mask, you become sort of an obligate mouth breather and your throat becomes persistently dry. So as someone who's heavily exposed on a daily basis, I constantly feel I have symptoms of a sore throat, and you become panicky because you do not want to infect your patients, you do not want to infect your healthcare workers, and you do not want to infect your family. So it's exceptionally scary, and all these things play in the back of your mind. I've swabbed personally because I'm convinced I have symptoms. So I've swabbed myself routinely. I think I've had 3 swabs already since this pandemic has started, because I need to know that I'm not. And I must be honest with you, it's literally beginning to sort of take its toll. I have friends who work in private. I have many friends who work in the public sector. And for me, it's difficult, but the extremes that they're facing at hospitals like Tygerberg and Groote Schuur, at Karl Bremer, where Almeda's working, it's the numbers are even larger, which means is that the mental and emotional toll on them, because most of us, we have families, and our biggest fear is that we're going to go home and infect our families.
So, Dr. Solomons, you've spoken quite a bit about the personal sacrifices that you've had to make and the way that you've had to adjust your personal interactions at home. You then carry the conversation into some of the professional shifts that have to be made. You mentioned 3 things. You said this is a new scenario that you've not been trained for. You also mentioned that the way in which you care for patients has had to change. Dr. Oosthuizen, I'd like to bring you into the conversation right now, speaking about patient care and, in fact, hospitals and how things have had to shift. One of the areas that you focus on quite a bit is around systems and system optimization in hospital. Can you share how this recent experience with COVID-19 has pressurized, changed, or shifted the system?
Yeah, sure. It's such an interesting thing because, as people, we focused on people and we focus on the stories of individual people. But what it takes for a system to be able to adapt and to be ready for this kind of thing is often invisible. And it's been incredibly interesting, stimulating, frustrating, exhausting, rewarding to be part of that. Yet imagine, exploding a bomb of this size in a large organization with no warning. Change management is probably one of the most difficult things, even in just a family, never mind a large organization with thousands of employees and millions of little moving parts. And then all of a sudden, overnight, you have to fundamentally change everything. There's no script, there are no rules, there's no experience to draw from, you don't know whether the decisions you make is right or wrong because the evidence is lacking. It's a bit like being a bus driver with a bus that's always over full and then being told, okay, quickly, there's a whole bunch of new people coming, you better fly them somewhere. And but I can't fly, I don't have a plane. And then we just build the plane. But how? I don't know how to build a plane. So just do it. And then you kind of build the plane and then you have to build your own parachute while still driving the bus. So it's incredibly challenging, and it fundamentally cancels out almost all of the things that we would normally use to mitigate for change management. Negotiation is gone, consensus is gone, delay is gone, communication cycles is gone, everything is gone. There's just this imperative that you have to change. So meeting that kind of fluidity with large organizations that's not made for and shouldn't be made for that kind of speedy fluidity has been extremely challenging. And this is especially in the context of the fact that our systems are going full tilt even before this. In our emergency center here, over the last 4 years, our average occupancy is just under 200%, 24/7, 375. So we're all, and that's not unique to us. It's not even just unique to this country. I've worked overseas, I've worked all over this country. Emergency services are burdened everywhere. So there's also no latent capacity. There's no magical bucket from which you can go and pull capacity and all of a sudden just do this. So everything that you do requires compromise. Everything that you do requires taking from someone and giving to something else. A concrete example, yes.
I was going to ask you exactly that. I was going to say, can you share then what some of the things that you have had to do and how you've had to implement these changes and these difficult changes that you described?
Yeah, so a few examples would be, so we would have to dramatically de-escalate our outpatient services. So people who would normally access outpatients, they might not be acutely ill, but if they can't access those services, they become sick. You have people that might have been waiting weeks or even months for appointments and even procedures such as endoscopies or surgeries. And all of a sudden, with an extremely short time frame, you're having to figure out, how am I going to phone all these people? How am I going to reschedule their appointments? What happens if they can't get the medications? What happens if something goes wrong? What do I do in that building? Just how do I do the IT? So having to spool down services is a logistical challenge, but then also having to deal with the implications of spooling down those services. If you don't want people to come to hospital regularly to get medications, how do you give them larger volumes of medications? What are the legal frameworks to be able to do that? How can you rescript if you can't get a doc because all your docs are sick? You know, in the hospital itself, yes.
So what is happening to those people?
So what's happening to them is that what we've been able to do is we've been able to, through the stint of marvelous work of so many different doctors and systems administrators, is we've been able to provide longer sort of durations of larger amounts of medications, of chronic medications.
Okay.
And we have been able to service people that are in trouble through smaller numbers, socially distanced clinics. We've been able to make plans via emergency services, telephone conversations, telemedicine. And I really, that's sort of what it comes down to. You do what it takes. You do what's necessary to help.
You do what it takes.
Yeah. And again, it changes all the time. So what's really interesting in this is if you think about fight or flight response or threat response. So what you're doing is you're taking an animal and you're putting it in the corner under threat and in danger, and they don't react as the best versions of themselves. And Corona is doing this to us as a planet. It's taking us as a planet, as a species, and it's pushing us into a corner. And we are having a collective, a societal fight, flight, and fear response. So whereas the systems is difficult to deal with, the people inside those systems are displaying often at the same time the very best of human nature and the very worst of human nature, all at the same time. So dealing with how systems move and patients move and how that happens has been incredibly satisfying to watch. I can just say that I am so very, I don't know what the right word for it would be, inspired, pleased about the incredible work that the system has been doing, people in the systems, our healthcare managers, directors, and everyone else to get things into place. Getting people to work where they're not comfortable, do what they're not really used to doing in a humane and a kind way.
I want to ask about a comment you've just made right now. You said the people in the system are taking strain. And perhaps I should ask, what is the system doing to take care of these people? And I'm going to start by saying healthcare workers themselves, given the enormous pressure that they find themselves under. So
most of that is, or not a lot, a very important part of that is relational. I think that when you've been working under pressure for a long time, you tend to foster tight teams of people with good relationships. And we're really leveraging all of that relational capital now to help and support each other. But then I can only really speak for my facility and substructure. We have access to counseling, debriefing, support. When people are sick, they get supported in their sick. When we need to get extra staff in where it's possible, we do. When we need to get equipment in it's possible, we do. So again, there's no script. So everyone's doing the very best that they can. And I must say that I've never really felt abandoned in all of this. Me and my team, I can only speak for us, I've felt supported, I've felt taken care of. Even though it's challenging. I think that maybe the thing that is most difficult to address is it's impossible to know whether you're doing the right thing. You know, if you're thinking about spooling up capacity, as a system, we could say, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to stop everything else and we're just going to focus on Corona. And then we can very easily take care of everybody. Or you can say, like, we're not going to do Corona, it's not worth it, we're going to focus on everything else. Or something in between. So we're doing something in between. But you'll never, ever know whether the decision you made was the right one because there's no experience to pull from. So the people that are needing to make these decisions and implement these decisions are having to make incredibly complicated judgment decisions, often with very little thanks and with no real way of knowing whether they're going in the right way or not. And then just being guided, I think, by best evidence they have and the morality for it. Yeah, I think. I think
that's a very fair point, though. You'll never really. There is no evidence. We have no scripts to go by, and so we are learning as we go along. You might not know whether you're doing the right thing in the long run, but you can only make the best decision for the times in which you find yourself in. You mentioned,
you have to be kind with yourself and the people around you about
absolutely,
what the impact of that is like, and I think maybe kindness, institutionalized, societal level, systemic level kindness is, I think, the one resource or the one thing that has been at the center of all the most positive things that I've seen.
Well, let's speak about kindness, and let's speak about societal kindness, and in fact, kindness at a community level. So, Lohadan, I'd like to bring it into the conversation now. The Nelson Mandela Foundation has long been doing work within communities and recently took a decision to extend their work to address the issues related to COVID-19 and how it's impacting communities. Please tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing. And while you're speaking, I am going to share some images that you have shared with me.
Thank you so much, Pato. And I think the level of kindness that Dr. Oosthuizen was talking about is experienced mainly when you even look at the work that you did with us when we climbed Kilimanjaro together to try raise much needed funds for sanitary pads, for example. So this is the work that we were doing with Mbumba Foundation. We continue to do with Mbumba Foundation. And recently, with the outbreak of COVID, the executive team of the Nelson Mandela Foundation then approached the board and said, we can't just throw money at the problem. In other words, where we just raise money, we give it to the government or to whoever that needs to make an intervention, and we leave it there. We went to the board and said, can we also fold our arms, and not fold our arms, rather, get out and get our hands dirty? And that's exactly what the board then encouraged us to do. We went out and started this partnership with the Kolisi Foundation and Mbumba Foundation, where we launched Each One Feed One. The genesis of this comes from how the anti-apartheid struggle was based on some of the key values such as human solidarity, human kindness, ensuring that you embrace instead of reject a person who is in most need, that you don't, when you have something, you share it with another. And this is based on the COSA's slogan, you'll remember, that said, each one, teach one. And we then decided to take on that slogan and said, how do we do this and help each person at an individual level? You know someone that is in dire need of food. At the family level, you know another family that's struggling. But as communities, the communities for example, close to where I live, the closest community there is Zanspruit, where we're saying, you in Roodepoort, there's Zanspruit that's nearby. You can't just go over as a community and look after those communities. That human kindness then was built, that's how this campaign was built on. And as to the viewers out there, we're saying, you can also be part of Each One Feed One by going on either the website of the foundation or the Kolisi Foundation or Mbumba Foundation. Or if not, when you go to your shopping, to do your shopping, that you then ensure that you at least drop off something for another person who can then at least enjoy the meal. Non-perishable stuff is what we are predominantly advocating for. In this cold, if you could just collect beans, for example, and just throw them in a supermarket, throw them most of the supermarkets have already have those trolleys, throw it in that trolley and it will be collected so that it can be given to another person. Dr. Oosthuizen actually got me there because it reminds me that some of the sacrifices that have to be made are deep but are needed. In fact, both doctors were saying that sometimes you get home late. I no longer know weekends. We've been traveling every Thursday and back home Sundays. We've gone to 6 of the 9 provinces. And this week we are in Northwest, for example. We just did a distribution in a rural place around in the Klerksdorp area, and Ottosdal area rather. And we went out there to distribute food, and you can see the desperation in people's eyes. And as you see them, you can't just walk away from a 70-plus-year-old who you can see you are their last hope in terms of access to food. But also the solidarity part that we've seen. This 70-odd-year-old that we met in Mpumalanga. So Richard and I went to Mpumalanga to do a distribution, and we're moved by how this undocumented 70-plus-year-old who's been in South Africa forever, doesn't have an ID, and as a result doesn't get any kind of support. The community has been looking after her in terms of food, months to months, after she couldn't work for herself. And she had her house destroyed by a storm. An NGO came, built her structure, which has now fallen into disrepair. An amazing thing, Pato, is that the community then decided, we will contribute 50 Rand, 100 Rand, whatever you have, to build a proper structure. When we got there, it was window high. And they were now saying, with Corona, most of them are now unemployed. They don't know how they're going to do this to complete the house. And in some instances, when funding permitting, we have been helping where we can. So it's been fascinating going around, and it gives you hope that people are not waiting for help; they're doing it themselves.
That's meaningful. I think what you've pointed out is that the situation out there is dire, and we must not be shielded from the harsh realities that some communities are facing when it comes to food insecurity. And it's, as companies struggle, because there has been a very clear economic impact on organizations, on small businesses who are unable to employ people. But it's those people who sit in fragile contracts, those pay-as-you-go and individuals who are most impacted because they are left stranded in times like this. And this is where the work of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Mbumba Foundation, and Khulise Foundation is really coming into play to ensure that these individuals, these members of communities are supported through this period. Dr. Solomons, I'm going to ask you a question. What we are all being told is that we are easing into some kind of lifting of restrictions, because in terms of economic impact, we must, and re-socialization, we must. But the doctors are reminding us that we have not yet hit our peak, right? So that the worst is still to come. What does that mean to you as a person who already is under pressure within the system? What are you anticipating? How much more can you take as an entity, and certainly as an individual? Because you've been going on overdrive for 7 weeks now. So do you still have it in you to keep going?
So look, it's taking its toll on me as an individual and as a doctor, as every other doctor who's working, whether or not it's in a private facility or as a state facility, in a state facility as well. We are inherently made for the fact that we will continue. This is our nature. We will provide you with 110%. We will look after our patients and we will give it our all. We are taking strain, but the thing is as medical professionals, I think we also just need to be mindful. So a system that I have working with my colleagues, and I work in an amazing team with a pulmonologist and another physician, and also an amazing anesthetist. When I feel that it's become too much for me, I do what I think is the best thing for me mentally, and I tap out. And I say, today is not the day for me. I'm not feeling 100%, which means I'm not going to give my patient 100%. Will someone else please assist and look after my patients? My fear, and this is the word, I'm actually scared. We have seen an immense increase in our numbers over the last 2 to 3 weeks. We, at our facility, and I can only speak to my facility, we are admitting about 6 to 7 patients who require high levels of oxygen on a daily basis. Our wards are currently full. We have extended into our pediatric wards. So it's placing strain on us as individuals, and also, as Almeida mentioned, on systems. So I'm fearful. I'm going to be honest with you, but I will not stop. I will continue. People need us. We are essential workers. We will continue to giving 110% because this is what we've basically been preparing for. We won't.
Sure. Dr. Oosthuizen, I'm going to ask you a question that continues the narrative that Dr. Solomons has started. I've asked her about people. Are the people in the system ready? A question that came in before the webinar, actually, was, is the system ready? Do we have the infrastructure in terms of health infrastructure to deal with what is still to come?
It's an impossible to answer question, because, you know, we were under constraint even before Corona. I think that we are doing extremely well. My experience of all the hospitals that I've been in, the colleagues that I've worked with, is that they have tapped every last job out of the system that they can. And so the South African society has given us the time to be prepared. They've given us the resources to be prepared. And we're as ready as we can be. You know, I'll be here until I fall over. All of us have chosen a life of service. And that's why we are here. So I'm glad to be of service. I think all of us are glad to be of service. And there'll be better days and worse days, but we'll cope. And I'm always reminded of my mother is a very wise woman, and she's been in childcare for a very long time. And she always tells the stories of when new parents are in their office and crying and they're feeling overwhelmed. They say, and then my mom tells them, but don't worry, you'll cope, you'll make it. And they ask her, but how do you know? And she says, because you don't have a choice. And I think that that's where we are now. We're as prepared as we can be. We're working as hard as we can. We'll ramp it up from there. But we'll cope because we don't have a choice. We will do it. We're here to serve. That's
incredibly humbling and incredibly inspirational. And it almost feels like one needs to say thank you to you both, but I know that that doesn't even, start to begin to describe the emotion that I'm certainly feeling. And I know that very many listeners might be feeling. Just a comment from the audience to you, Selo, and to the many others that are doing work like this GT Ndlovu from KZN says, thank you for taking care of the needy. May God bless you and protect you. And a question to you, Selo, says, what are your thoughts on certain restrictions that have been made on community food drive initiatives? Surely we should all be free to choose if and how we contribute.
It's a pity that there have been some level of short-sightedness when it comes to this issue. And firstly, let me thank the kind words that we will keep pushing, we'll keep trying hard. But on this issue of food distribution, there's been some short-sightedness. The foundation has come out strongly to the effect that it's ludicrous to think that in some instances where you can see that the functions of the state in terms of distribution of food is failing for many reasons. In some instances, it's corruption. In other instances, it's favoritism. In others, it's greed. So where you have an NGO that's been, or an NPO, or even a CBO that's been working with a community for over 40 years, preceding apartheid, the downfall of apartheid, where they've been providing some kind of support to communities. And then you tell them, for this kind of crisis, you can't do what you've been doing for 40 years. It's ludicrous. So we are hoping that at some point, some common sense will reign supreme, and people will then see that with greater collaboration, we are likely to get some big wins. Because it's only when you have the private sector, when you have the NGO sector, and when you have government working together, that we can defeat hunger in our country. The levels of hunger, Pato, are just, they break your heart. I had an instance 2-3 weeks ago in Orange Farm, where we're distributing to families that are impacted by HIV/AIDS. So they've been members of this organization for a long time. And this father came with 2 children and said, asked the security guard, so who qualifies here? They said, no, mainly children who are affected or infected with the virus. And this father then said, what do I do with these 2? They haven't eaten for 2 days. Oops. And you can see the desperation both in the father's eyes, that you are now my last stop, but those 2 children, you actually can see that there's nothing left that they can give. I've been there as a child. And one of the reasons that Sia and myself and Richard are doing this is because we have gone to bed hungry many times. And every time we share stories of how we survived, the three of us, it propels us to do more, to just keep going, because sleeping with just a little bit of sugar in water was what we went through as children. We wouldn't want that kind of wound to be passed on.
When you know the pain, or when you felt the pain yourself, suddenly your lens changes, and certainly your conviction does as well. Thank you for sharing that. I know that Sia Kolisi was potentially going to make a visit, and so when he does join, if he does join, please just let me know, and he is most welcome to be invited into the conversation to share his experience and his recent experience, which is a drastic turn from the light in which we've recently seen him in the past year, such as the way that our times have changed. A question coming back to you, perhaps, Dr. Solomons, a question from an anonymous attendee asking your thoughts on certain medical practices that have closed during COVID-19 and that still remain closed this time. I accept that you can't speak on behalf of all doctors or medical practitioners, but maybe really just ask me your personal view on this.
So we have to be kind, and I think Almeida spoke about it, and it's going to be about personal preference. Apologies.
No, in fact, let me pause there and say and acknowledge there is some background noise, but I'd ask our audience to be understanding, because both Dr. Almira and Dr. Zarina are joining us from their place of work, which means that you will hear hospital announcements in the background, and it is part and parcel of what you do. We do appreciate you taking time to join this conversation. Please carry on.
So we have to be kind. A lot of the practices, especially in the area that my hospital is sort of based, a lot of the practices are owned by elderly doctors. And a lot of these practices have actually been exposed to patients who have come back with COVID tests, and many of them have actually been subsequently gone into isolation with either positive results. As I said, it's a personal preference. Keeping that in mind, it will assist, because as Almeida also mentioned, is there's a lot of our patients or our chronic patients who still require treatment. They are the hypertensives and the diabetics and the patients with heart failure who will need the medications, and they will need repeated scripts, and they will need blood pressures to be checked and glycemic checks. And we still need to not forget that there's another aspect to medicine. We focused on corona. So as I said, it would be beneficial to us if we have sort of all practices open on a primary care level to address these issues, because we have gated the amount of sort of patients who've come into a hospital setting, because we also want to minimize that sort of context. From my perspective, my rooms have been closed to sort of patients who require follow-ups. I've been practicing a lot of telemedicine. I've been re-scripting my patients, asking them to contact me if there's an emergency, and I will see to it as a sort of a matter of urgency. But sort of routine things, I've scaled down significantly. As of level 3, I see that I think many of the practices will start opening. So I can't speak for many people. It's a personal preference, but I know from a perspective on the floor, doctors have been exposed to COVID. They've contracted COVID, and that is sort of driving the decision to open the practices at the moment. So we just need to be kind and understanding.
Kindness being the theme of the day today, and I think something that will definitely be a take-home message: being kind to yourself, being kind to each other as we all try and figure out how do we navigate our way through this very difficult journey. Being kind to the frontline workers, because they too are experiencing a significant amount of tension and are also new to this experience. Dr. Almiro, a question from an anonymous attendee on reporting. There are some countries where there's been a lot of skepticism about the accuracy of reporting when it comes to statistics and positive cases or recoveries. And so an anonymous attendee asking, can we expect true reporting in terms of cause of death? And how were you briefed? So maybe this question is also not just about the COVID statistics, but also about, it seems that any death these days, in inverted commas, might be COVID related. So your comments on that?
Yeah, so I want to reassure the person who asked that question and people listening here that everything that we know, we are telling. Not just because we want to, but we have to. We have extremely robust systems, regulations and laws around how we report why people pass away or what happened. So everything that we know is being told. My colleague that shares an office with me spends hours and hours and hours every week that isn't even close to being her portfolio of making sure that our data is accurate and that what we know is out there. But I know that that's the case in all departments and hospitals that I know of. The uncertainty really comes from is sometimes we just don't know and we can't say what we don't know. You know, if someone passes away at home, we don't know if they might have had corona or not. If someone comes in and they passes away even before they're able to be tested, we don't know. In the same way as if someone passed away at home before all of this, you know, unless you do post-mortems on everybody, and even then you mightn't know. So there is a fundamental uncertainty in all of this, and that's just the messiness of life, the messiness of the real world. But we are working extremely hard to get the data and the information that is needed, integrating that into our clinical practice. And there are very robust systems that are very tightly regulated and overseen. So no numbers are going under, and with multiple levels of checks and balances. So I'm not in control of all my own reporting. All of it gets captured at multiple levels. There are automatic and in-person checks and balances. So no, I certainly haven't seen or I'm aware of any kind of hiding of numbers.
Thank you for that. So an assurance that there is accurate reporting and certainly not any intention to hide any truths, at least in this particular period. A question that's come in from Facebook from Mandela, and he's actually directed this to the doctors, but I want to invite Silo into the conversation and ask you for your insight when it comes to community level. The question Mandla asks is, how do the doctors deal with personal mental health during this time? And so before I invite the doctors to answer this question, Silo, I want to actually ask you, you work a lot through the Nelson Mandela Foundation with communities. Have you experienced through the work and your network of social workers that there's increased mental health concerns and mental health issues in communities at this particular time? And in communities where perhaps access to mental health support is not as readily available as in more affluent communities, how is this being dealt with?
I think what Mandla is bringing to the fore is something that we generally neglect, but particularly in this case, we shouldn't neglect, because mental health is something that, as the foundation, we have been concerned about for a while also. That's why 2 years ago, we raised funds through the IDC for them to renovate the Sterkfontein Hospital, mental hospital. And I think it's because many people, even back then, were holding what I call suicide notes in their back pockets. Now, for that father who has 2 children who haven't eaten for 2 days, you can imagine as the father who has those 2, what it does to one's mental health. And I think we shouldn't take it lightly that it's a subject that all of us should be looking out for. We haven't done a lot in this case, in this time, about mental health, but you can rest assured that it's something that's there, and it will impact most of the community members a lot. That's why in some instances you find these families just budging into these distribution centers, wanting to break through just so that they can get something. It's not normal behavior. It's because people are on the edge, and it's that edge that we should watch out for.
Absolutely. We had one of the webinars in recent weeks was on the issue of mental health in the context of the coronavirus pandemic, and we had a clinical psychologist and a mental health or mental coach who really spoke to the heightened sense of emotion at this particular time, exacerbated by uncertainty, exacerbated by financial pressures and strains, exacerbated by food insecurity, and really the strain that this is causing on individuals. Let's answer the question directly. And the question was aimed to the doctors and asked, how do the doctors deal with personal health or mental health during this time? Dr. Zarina, can I ask this question to you?
So I think all of us, we have different outlets. For me personally, what I choose to do is I've got an amazing support structure. I rely heavily on religion and my family, and I've got a very close network of amazing friends. I'm not above seeking sort of help from a psychologist or psychiatrist if the need arises. But as I said, we are relying closely on our friends who are within the front line as well. I find that I speak to colleagues on a daily basis to vent or discuss my issues, and that provides a massive outlet. If a patient passes on or a patient gets discharged, we celebrate the positive things, we mourn the negative things, and then we pick ourselves up and we move on. That speaking to each other is by far one of the best outlets, and also encouraging each other. And that's kind of getting me through this entire process at the moment.
I think that's advice that we've heard time and time again. We've spoken about social distance or physical distance, but not emotional distance, and the real importance of staying connected with your base and your network of support, whoever that might be. For many people, that would be friends and family. It might even be your colleagues, because at least you're going through an experience that you can relate to, that your family members may not relate to. But in the case of the man on the street, in the case of those of us that are listening, really the importance of remaining connected to your network, staying connected to those practices that ground you. Dr. Solomon's mentioned prayer and religion, and that might be the case for those of you that are listening as well. It might be something like dance, it might be music, it might be a different outlet, but just staying connected to those practices like meditation that ground you. A question to the doctors, and Dr. Almira, I'll direct this one at you. Do you feel that telemedicine will become more commonly used moving forward? And what are your thoughts on telemedicine practice? Can it give you the same kind of care as what we are historically used to?
Yeah, so I definitely think that telemedicine will play a growing role moving forward. I think that was already happening. This will accelerate that. Can it give us the same care? No, because it's not the same thing, but it doesn't mean that it has to be a bad thing. It'll give us telemedicine care. So there's so many wonderful ways that you can incorporate telemedicine into your practice. I'll give you one concrete example of how we might be planning to use that in our context is we've had to have scenario plannings for what if our systems break? What if we have critical skills, docs with critical competencies that can't be at home? Well, we'll just take them on the ward run with an iPad with us, you know, just because they aren't there physically doesn't mean they can't still see, be part of the conversation and give advice. So yes, I think that innovative value-adding ways to use telemedicine is definitely a part of our healthcare future and will happen faster because of Corona.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that we must come to terms with as individuals and certainly as a society is that things will not necessarily go back to the way they were. And in some cases, they shouldn't. We need to acknowledge and embrace the fact that things going forward might look different to the way they were in the past. And difference doesn't necessarily mean negative or bad. It just does mean different. And there's a different reality that we must face. Just one question. Sello mentioned partnerships and mentioned collaboration. I'm interested to know about the partnerships and collaboration that have been taking place between public and private. Has that taken place in terms of the provision of healthcare at this particular time?
So at the levels of my system intervention, yes and no. I think that that's probably a question for the healthcare administrators, but we have, for instance, been able to set up partnerships with some private laboratories to help us with testing capacity. We certainly do take patients in state from private where funds run out or when they're unable to cover their funds. I know that private has helped in the opposite direction. There are relationships and professional relationships where there's a sharing of knowledge and an involvement in that sense. And outside of healthcare as well, we've had lots of involvement. So it really, I think, people step up to the challenge and the opportunity, and I've experienced that at my level. It'd be interesting to know what Zarina's perspective might be on how they've been involved in public from their side, or not.
So Dr. Solomon's working in a private entity, and the question really is, has there been a level of collaboration with the public sector in your specific setting?
So at the moment, no. I know that over the last 2 weeks, with a surge in numbers, there have been multiple conversations that have been had between the Department of Health with potentially sort of acquiring beds in private. Nothing has sort of been sorted, and we haven't received anything in contact form, and we haven't received any sort of rollout as yet. But discussions have been had with all of the various private groups to date, and there have been requests for a certain amount of beds from private to assist when state basically becomes overrun, and obviously remuneration. I've not took in any of these meetings. I've not attended, but I am aware of what is sort of going on behind the scenes. Other than that, I think that everybody from a private perspective, or the people that I work with, we are prepared to assist as well. I don't think that it's about sort of a private-public issue anymore. I think it's about humanity and
absolutely. Absolutely.
And just we can. But as I said, it's all of sort of getting systems in place now and capacity at this point, and where we can assist. I think we are prepared to do so.
Thank you. A comment from Kanya Nisuzu, who also joins us from Gauteng, and a comment to all of you that says, many thanks for being our angels on earth. May you find strength and reward in all that you do. A comment aimed at the doctors, the nurses in absentia, and certainly those doing community work. We are thrilled to be joined by Sia Khulisi, who is currently working with the Nelson Mandela Foundation and the Mbumba Foundation in order to drive and deliver this Each One, Feed One campaign. Sia, welcome. Thank you very much for joining with Selo on the call. We have spoken quite a bit about the incredible work that you and many others in your position are doing. You're doing it through the Khulisi Foundation. I made a comment that, you know, before COVID-19, the Sia we knew was the Sia on the rugby field, the one that was holding up a trophy. And you have very quickly not left that behind, but stepped into another role. Can you share your recent experiences with us? And thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope you guys are all safe and doing well. Thank you for all that you are doing. We really do appreciate it. You guys are actually the heroes, and we're just here supporting you guys, hoping to make your jobs a bit easier by keeping people at home. I've always been doing this kind of work because I'm also a product of philanthropy. I got a bursary to go to Grey, and my community means a lot to me, and I don't think I'll be the person that I am without them. So I've been working really hard to try and give back to my community, and obviously during this time, it had to be, I got more time in my hands, so I could travel a bit more, and I had to show we have to show love in every province, because they're the same people that support us and use their last cent to go watch us in the rugby stadium. And I believe this is the opportunity for us. If you have a platform, use it. And you don't physically have to be there. But myself and Telo decided, because if people are trusting us with fees, we want to make sure it goes to the right places. And, you know, and that's what we wanted to do, to make sure that the food goes to the people. And we encourage them to stay home. We give them some masks, sanitizers, to make sure that they actually look after. And we want people to know that we are also human. We've experienced these kind of problems, and that we are here thinking of them, and we want to make sure that the kids are looked after, because I also went to school, and the only meal I got was at school. And now the schools are closed. So now I know for a fact that those families are struggling, just like my grandmother was struggling. So now we're going back to make sure that they look after. And I'm like, I don't do this kind of stuff for to be noticed or anything like that. We only post so we can encourage others to do the same, or inspire others to do the same. And it's good for the sponsors to see where their money is going to. And it does encourage a lot of other people, and it challenges other people in South Africa. And the one thing I've seen is something that I've always known that makes me so proud to be South African. Whenever we go through a time like this, or like a rugby game, a World Cup final, where we're not supposed to win the final, we always pull together and fight as hard as we can to get through that period. And what I've seen this time is like a Pick and Pay working with a ShopRite, and a Woolworth working with a ShopRite. And that's the most important thing. It's not us, it's the humans, it's the South African that's the most important thing. And we're fighting towards that. So whenever somebody wants to work with me, I tell them I'm working with this one. They're like, no, you can't work, you must choose one. I say bye-bye, because I'm thinking about the people that we must work with, not each individual what they must gain out of it.
Absolutely. And so that theme of collaboration, partnerships for impact coming out again in your words, Siyakhulisi. Any specific message, and I'm going to start to wrap it up because I'm mindful of the time. So your plea or your request to South Africans as the foundations that are involved in the Each One, Feed One campaign, or generally just building on that sentiment that you've just said now that says that don't forget our communities. You have seen the harsh realities from the front line, from the work that you are doing. You've seen it. Given what you know, what do you want us to know as South Africans who are not seeing what you're seeing?
It's actually like I thought I knew what struggle was until I've seen some of the places that I've been to. Simple things like running water. I remember we were driving in Limpopo, and me and Putsela was sitting in front of me, and it had rained just before we got there, and there was a puddle of water. You know, when after it rains, you know, there's little puddles of water. There was this dog drinking. There were dogs drinking water, and this lady was getting water, and that water she uses to cook, to wash her clothes and all that kind of stuff. And it made me think, you know, there's a lot of people who don't know this happens in South Africa. You know, and we're telling people to stay at home. We don't know what their problems are. Because when I was younger, I used to go to my neighbor to ask to, you know, take a cup and go ask for meal or rice. But now you can't do that anymore. And I'm saying, if you can help it anyway, 5 rand, 1 rand, it doesn't matter. It will make a difference in somebody's life. When you go to the store, think about someone else. Try and buy an extra can and put it in. You know, every store has like places where you can place the food, because as much as we all want to go back to doing what we love, if we don't look after the most vulnerable, there's no ways we can go and do what we love. And the people that are the vulnerable ones are normally the ones that are working and allowing us to do what we love. So if they don't get to look after, nothing can go back to normal. So that's my only plea. Let's work together, put your egos aside, and just focus on making sure that our people are looked after and they're safe, and you've done your part. And sometimes your part is to stay at home. That's important. You can do that. That's as valuable as somebody donating 1 billion rand to this cause.
Keep doing the incredible work you're doing. Siyakhulisi is saying there's no going back, there's only going forward, but we should be going forward together. Dr. Omiro, in 30 seconds, what is your plea to South Africans, knowing what you know and seeing what you see?
Be of service. My career has given me the opportunity to be of service to people who otherwise would not have been able to get that. And it has been the greatest privilege of my life. There are people in this country at this time experiencing the most unimaginable hardships. Don't wait for opportunities to come to you to be of service. Be deliberate, be aggressive, find ways to help. Now is the time to step up to that opportunity. If we can all do that, then maybe the legacy we could have of this moving forward is a society doing that as a habit and not as something that only happens occasionally. Be kind and be of service to people who need you.
Be kind and be of service to yourself and to people who need you. Dr. Solomons, your plea to South Africans.
I think Almeida has basically summed it up. I think we all need to be responsible at this point, and we need to contribute in any which way that we can. As Sia also said, whether or not we're contributing 1 rand, 5 rand, assisting with distribution of food, whether or not we just choose to stay at home and social distance and sanitize, I think we all need to step up at this point so that we can basically make sure that the people that are affected and that the vulnerable people are protected at this point.
Thank you to you, Zarina. Thank you, Almira. Thank you, Selo. Thank you, Sia, for joining us. We started this webinar series 7 weeks ago at the Sports Science Institute of South Africa. We started it as a way to meaningfully engage with our broader network on the subject of COVID-19 and the various ways in which it is impacting us as individuals, as communities, and as a country. During the past 7 weeks, we have considered the impact of the pandemic on health and healthcare, on livelihoods and economics, on mental health, on nutrition and immunity, on exercise and physical activity, on the fitness and sports industry. And today we took a look through the lens of frontline workers. We've been joined by experts in each of these fields who have volunteered their time to help us unpack these various topics. Thank you to all of you today, and thank you to the experts and panelists who have joined us in the past 7 weeks. To the participants that have joined us on this journey, thank you very much for your feedback. We know that you found it meaningful And we're thankful to have been able to explore with you these past 7 weeks. And finally, to the team at the Sports Science Institute of South Africa who have made the magic happen. You are seen, you are valued. Thank you. I'll wrap up the series with the themes for today. The themes for today being, be kind to yourself and to others. Be of service to yourself and to others. As Sia Khulisi reminded us, we have always been a country that is able to unite in times of difficulty and always been able to celebrate as well as a country. Today, more than ever, let us unite as we look ahead and as we face the realities of the times to come. I end the series with a thankful heart. It has been a privilege to be able to journey with you all in the past 7 weeks. Thank you for sharing your space, your time, and your energy with me. From me, Pato Butlizondi, take care, stay safe, and until next time, thank you all of you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.